for those that are joining us live, and if you're watching on YouTube, welcome to you as well. Absolutely delighted for many reasons. We're going to have a lovely chat today. We have Air Commodore Dawn McCafferty, who is the current but outgoing Commandant of the RAF Air Cadets, who has been in that role for a considerable period of time, and we shall talk on that as we go through. But Dawn, good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Good morning, Dale. Yes, I can see you and hear you. Lovely to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me.
No, not at all. It is our absolute pleasure, and right from the beginning, let's just get out there the support that that the Corps gives, the RAF Air Cadet organisation as a whole gives to the RAF Association is just absolutely incredible. And as the head shed, thank you. I know that will pass down at some stage, but we're really grateful for the support you give us. How are you keeping?
Absolutely. I'm keeping very well, thank you, despite these unusual times. Yeah, trying to keep morale up and send positive messages across the organisation, even if we only do it remotely.
Yeah, no, we were chatting before, weren't we, about the interesting times we're in, the technology that's being embraced. We've got loads to touch on, Dawn, loads and loads, because of course we've known each other for years anyway. Let's talk about the Corps to start with. We'll go back to the career stuff later, but clearly you're coming to the end of your time as the Commandant after 8 years. Not a day goes by that I don't jump onto some social media platform and you're there doing something with the cadets. Yeah. Just tell us about how it's all been, all yours.
It's been an amazing opportunity. It's a job I wanted when I was still serving as a regular and didn't get the chance at that stage, and just basically thought it would never come my way. And I was just very, very lucky. Right place, right time. As you know, I was working with the RAF Association, running the Families Federation for 5 years after I left the regulars. And this job as Commandant was converted to full-time reservist, which meant I had the opportunity to compete for it, even though I was the wrong rank at the time. But I was encouraged by friends and colleagues to go for it. I'd always wanted to do the job, and I was just so lucky to get it. Did an initial 4-year contract, applied in my 3rd year for an extension to 8, because I'd said in my heart of hearts I would do 8 if I could. 4 plus 4 I felt was a decent period of time, and I'm now the longest serving Commandant ever, which I'm really proud of. It will probably be overtaken in due course, but at the moment I'm really proud to hold that sort of particular title, because it means I've been around for a generation of cadets, a whole generation of young people who joined us at 12 or 13 and have sort of transitioned out at 19, 20. I've been the only Commandant they know, and I think that's a really nice place to be. And I think of them as my generation of cadets, that I'll have had some influence over them for that whole period. And it's just been an incredible roller coaster, an amazing tour, lots of challenges, some ups, some downs, lots more ups than downs, I have to say. And I leave with a heavy heart. I always said when I got the job, I would never apply for another full-time job after this, that this would be the pinnacle of any career I could hope for. And it's proven to be that. There's no other job that I would go for full-time that I think would be as satisfying or as rewarding. So I'm stepping back, and I'll do a portfolio of volunteering and non-executive stuff if people will have me, but I can't think of a better job. I just can't.
Would you say in what I think, if my maths is right, a 37-year career in the service? Yeah, sorry. Has this been the best job?
Definitely. Yeah, each time I got a job, and I was promoted or moved into a new job, I remember thinking when I got to be PMS, OC Personnel Management Squadron at Wittering, that was my big dream, to get that. And then I became an OC admin wing at Waddington, and that was my best job ever. I have to say MOD left me completely underwhelmed, so that was not my best job. And then I went on promotion to be head of recruiting, and that was my best job ever. Given the freedom to run the Families Federation from scratch was the best. So I just kept getting more and more better jobs, the longer I stayed within the organisation. And this one's just been the cherry on the top of a cake. It's just been incredible. So yes, very much my best job.
It's a very unfair question to ask, but I'm known for asking unfair questions, I guess. But you said about highs and lows in your time as the Commandant. Let's not stick to one, because that would be very unfair. But what have the particular highs been?
The highs have been incredible. I mean, you can't, not mention 2016, which was the ATC 75th anniversary. We spent pretty much the whole year celebrating that anniversary, and that involved all the cadets, all the squadrons up and down the country. So that was a phenomenal, exhausting year, but really, an opportunity to put the Air Cadets on the map, and we did, and we did it in style. So I thoroughly enjoyed that year. RAF 100, 2 years later, you know, again, an opportunity for the Air Cadets to really link up with their parent service and the charities and just show that we are the light blue footprint and we are the next generation. So another highlight there. And then there's little things like, you know, I will go to my grave remembering moments when, you know, cadets have moved me to tears by things they've said or things they've done, just innocent comments that just get you here. You know, that little promotion on a parade at a squadron that you wouldn't normally have gone to. And it, you know, it means the world to that little cadet that the commandant is there giving them their promotion or their certificate. So there's lots of little moments like that that actually will make me very emotional when I come to leave.
And are you going to leave it all behind for a while? You said about possibly getting involved with a squadron.
Yeah, I mean, when I left, I started my resettlement planning a couple of years ago, and I knew I couldn't just go off a cliff edge after 30 odd years, full-time, max chat, you know, lots of responsibility. To go to that to retirement would probably give me a heart attack. So I thought I need to plan this carefully. And a big part of my resettlement jigsaw was to be a volunteer. I don't think you can walk away. It's similar with the RAF Association. It gets under your skin, and I couldn't walk away from it. So I've been rash enough to volunteer, to be an adult volunteer. So I've registered as a civilian instructor. Obviously, I can't actually join them at the moment because I've got to go through training, which some of it can't be delivered online. But I'm going through the process of applying. And my hope is that I can help across the wing, not just at a local squadron. So there's a squadron just down the road from where I live, St. Blazy, and I've already joined them for a virtual night, and they've been very welcoming. But I'd like to think I can join the sector and Plymouth and Cornwall wing and help out wherever the staff, you know, needs some support. I'm not ever going to be a specialist at, you know, aviation or shooting, but I could perhaps do a bit on leadership or first aid or mental health awareness. There's lots of areas I think I'd like to see if I can add value. So it'll be down to the staff now to turn to me and say, what would they like me to do? And if they can train me up and give me the qualification, I'd like to put my spare time to good use with the Air Cadets.
I mean, absolutely fantastic to go back and volunteer. And again, we were discussing before we started formally about the dependence that the Corps has on volunteers. And absolutely like us as the association, without the volunteers, be they members, committee members, or anybody that does fundraising or welfare delivery, we would be absolutely lost without them. What have you seen that's inspired you with the volunteers across the Corps?
They are absolutely the lifeblood of what we do, and they are just a remarkable group of people. There's about, we think, between 12 and 15,000 adult volunteers in various guises supporting us. They might be in uniform, they might be civilian instructors, padres, gliding instructors on the civilian committees, and they all give their heart and soul, you know, to this organisation. Many of them give many hours of their spare time to support us. And, you know, the way they've reacted to this particular crisis has been nothing short of miraculous. Within a couple of weeks, you know, I did nothing. I just sat there like a rabbit in the headlights going, oh my word, how on earth are we going to cope with this? Stop. So I came back from leave and my whole organisation stopped. You are not going to do face-to-face. And at that stage, no idea how long this would last. And literally within days, or certainly within weeks, something like 60 to 70% of the units were operating in some virtual online capacity. And some of it now is absolutely phenomenal. I've joined lessons, you know, I've done first aid training online. I have listened to guest speakers from across the country. They're reaching out in ways and they're just using their imagination, and they're working so hard to make sure we don't lose, you know, cadets during this pause, and also making sure those cadets have something to feel connected to, because they've been hit really hard, this generation. You know, they've lost their school connections, their other social activities. Cadets, for many of them, is another family. And if we had just closed the doors and said, you know, we'll see you when we get back to face, I think there've been some real mental health crises across the organisation. And I think by reaching out, keeping them connected, talking to them, giving them activities, allowing them to compete in, you know, competitions and quizzes, we've given them, some of them, a necessary lifeline, and hopefully, you know, they'll come back to us when we get back to face.
Have you managed to keep the recruiting of cadets going, or is that held off at the moment?
It is at the moment, because, you know, what we're doing is taking expressions of interest from the cadets and the adult volunteers, but clearly there are processes that we need to go through, that some of it would be difficult to do online. And of course, all of my staff, my permanent staff, are working from home, and none of my headquarters are manned. And we've got issues to do with, you know, DBS clearances and security clearances, and just normal routine admin that actually is, you know, definitely impacted by the ability of my staff to get into a headquarters and access some of their computer systems. So, you know, we're very much still in the, you know, the process of retaining the cadets and staff that we had before we went into pause, and being ready to embrace those who want to join us as soon as we can open our doors again.
Have you got any feel for when that might be? I mean, we're all in a very difficult space, but is there
It
any?
is very difficult because, it doesn't help as well that we're a nationwide organisation, and indeed we have some overseas units. And of course, there's different rules applying in different parts of the UK, let alone, in the Channel Islands, the Isle of Man, Cyprus, Gibraltar. So, we've got challenges in trying to keep ahead of what the governments or different administrations are providing advice on. I think we've said for some time we will probably be guided by what is happening in schools, but it's only this week we've had some guidance about sort of youth organisations and how they might plan for recovery and going back to face, possibly within social distancing regulations. So, I'd like to think, as soon as possible, but we've got to be practical and not manage, got to manage the expectations of the staff and the cadets. When we get the buildings back, we've got to make sure they're safe. So they're going to have safety checks, etc. Then we need to make sure the adult staff are qualified, because a lot of qualifications will have lapsed in the last 3 or 4 months. So we need to get them requalified, and that will take an effort. And then we'll be in a position where we can bring some, but maybe not all of our cadets back. And we may end up doing, Tuesday, half the squadron parades, on Thursday, the other half parades. So we do a blend of some virtual training and some live training. Who knows? I mean, we're in the process of sort of thinking that through and working out how do we recover to best effect. Will it be from September onwards? I wouldn't like to guess. I genuinely don't know. We're planning as soon as we get the go, then we'd like to start obviously doing face-to-face, but it's a really, really difficult area at the moment. And I think, everyone in society, the schools and other youth organisations, the scouts, the guides, the army cadets, we're all trying to muddle our way through and work out when can we recover and how do we recover? And will it ever be the same?
So not the end to your time as commandant as you might have imagined a couple of years back.
No, I think, even just before Christmas, I had it all in my diary. I would have spent the last 6 months whizzing around the whole of the UK and just, participating in as many activities as I could, seeing as many cadets and staff as I could, saying huge thank yous, really sincere thank yous to all my staff and volunteers. And that's just all been, taken away. And I'm stuck at home in Cornwall. Much as I love my new home, I really would love to be out seeing cadets and staff. I've done virtual stuff. I've joined cadets and staff, via virtual parade nights. I'm writing to them. I've set some competitions, but it's nowhere near the same. That human contact, which I thrive on. I love being in a room full of people. I love going to events, and it's just not the same via a screen. So it's very different, but I'm trying not to be too demoralized by it, because I think, worse things have happened. There's an awful lot of real tragedy associated with this crisis. And I think, for me, I just need to adjust my own, my own thresholds and say, it is what it is. And I've had a great run. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And, I will say goodbye and wish everybody all the best. And the organisation will continue to thrive.
Your enjoyment of the role, but both as I've watched it over the last 8 years, of course, where we've spoken anyway, and everything I've seen and heard, your infection for the role is, or your passion for the role is absolutely infectious, rather. What advice would you give to your successor?
Well, Tony Keeling is coming in September to replace me, and I'm really pleased to be handing the baton to him. I don't know him well, but I think he brings a different skill set to the organisation. And after 8 years, they've had enough of McCafferty. They need a new fresh breath of air. And I think he just needs to bring his own skill set and stamp his own mark on the organisation. Listen to the volunteers, listen to the cadets, listen to the staff. Don't try and implement change immediately, because it's going to happen anyway. It'll come out and catch you. I've been caught up by a number of change programs that nobody could have predicted. And just enjoy it. He needs to, and I'm sure he will, understand the volunteer ethos. It is very different to being in command of military personnel on a contract of employment. You need a hearts and minds exercise. But Tony's a people person, and I think he's going to be great for the organisation. And I'll encourage him to get out as much as he can, as much as he's able, but perhaps not to thrash it quite as much as I did, because I came close to breaking myself. If I'm really honest, I look back to my first few years. I was like a little ghost at the end of my first year, because I had tried to do MOD Monday to Fridays and cadet and adult volunteer evenings and weekends, and I very nearly burnt myself out on a number of occasions. So I tell him to pace himself for the long run, because the job is phenomenal. It will open doors he can't imagine are going to open for him and his organisation, and to also to allow the organisation the freedom to be what it is. I don't think you can actually command the RAF Air Cadets without stepping back and allowing innovation and imagination and the freedom of the volunteers and those senior cadets to shape the organisation. It's just too big and too exciting and too vast in scale to try and command it in any way. You just have to steer it, and every now and again you represent it, you step up and defend it if you need to, which doesn't happen too often because we've got a great reputation. But I wish Tony all the best. I was delighted when his name came as my successor. It's always hard to hand over a command tour even after 2 years. So doing it after 8, it feels like handing over part of my family. But I know he'll look after it.
Well, and likewise, we look forward to working with him in much the same way as we've enjoyed working with you and with the Corps as a whole. And I think what you say is that it's bigger than just the one person, whether that's the commandant or one individual member. You touched there on not being able to command as such. So I think it's a really interesting observation. What sort of adjustment did you find, having gone from regular service? And I know you were at the Families Federation for a good number of years, but all the command and leadership skills that you'd acquired over a 30-year career, then going into an environment in the Air Cadet organisation as was, how did you have to adjust your approach, if I can ask you that?
I think it helped that I'd worked with volunteers for 5 years with RAF Association, because I think that gave me my first exposure to actually working with volunteers and realising that they have a different dynamic and have a different motivation, and they don't always see it from the perspective that you might want to see things. And actually the only way to succeed is to understand it from their perspective. You've got to get behind their motivation and got to push their buttons. That's my view. And it's not manipulative, it's just understanding the way people work. And I think I didn't have to adjust too much. I had to adjust my working hours to recognise that, just working the standard staff hours was not going to reach the people who are actually the majority of the organisation. And I think you have to adjust your timescales. Things won't happen as quickly. In fact, they might not happen at all. And you have to sort of accept that you might put a task out and you're asking people to do something for you in their spare time as a volunteer. So it's not you are to, it's would you mind awfully? Could you please? Would you mind trying to do this by this time? And accepting that not everyone's going to do it to the deadline or to the standard that you expect. Most of my volunteers haven't done service writing lessons. They don't understand necessarily the language that the regular service uses. And you just have to adapt and do the best with what they give you and accept that it is volunteers giving of their time and just be grateful for that.
I think we have exactly the same dynamic. Again, we mentioned earlier on about the strength in volunteers, and any organisation, ours especially as a charity and yours as a youth organisation, if you don't have the volunteers giving freely of their time, then we're all in a pickle. So yeah, it's interesting. Now I'm going to go right back. Were you a cadet yourself, just out of interest?
I'm too old, Del, because that's always my excuse, is that they didn't open cadets to girls until the 1980s, 81, 82. Some units allowed girls in for the first time, and I was already at sixth form, so I had missed the boat. And I hadn't even heard of cadets when I joined the RAF. I only really became aware of it as a concept when I got to initial officer training and realised that I was with people, some ex-regular, who were like senior NCOs going for their commission, but a group of younger people who knew how to do their uniform, knew the rank structure, knew how to march. And I was just completely bemused, thinking, why am I so far behind these people? And it's because they've been Air Cadets. Some of them Army Cadets, but mostly Air Cadets. And I thought, I'd never heard of them. So I was never a cadet. And, I sometimes say I've used this last 8 years to be a cadet. I've done as much cadet activity as I could. And if I could, I'd have collected as many badges as well. But I've used the opportunity to join in as much as I can and actually relive the cadet experience in my 50s.
So you've undertaken the cadet experience with a little more wisdom that you might have done at 13 and a half or
absolutely.
Yeah.
But I bet I would have still gone for the same activities and enjoyed the ones that drew me in at 55, 56 are the ones that would have drawn me in at 13 or 14, I think. So,
sorry. I was just saying, please.
Adventurous training and stuff like that, first aid, sport. I can see myself doing that. And they're the things that I've really enjoyed sort of joining the cadets in. But who would have thought I'd do drill? When I was a regular, I ran 1,000,000 miles from drill. Any parade, I was in the opposite direction.
I'm saying absolutely nothing. It'd be inappropriate for me to even comment on your drill as a regular.
But now as a commandant, I led a parade last summer of 320 cadets in front of DCOM Ops and my AOC. And I was the parade commander. I carried a sword. I was so proud and so scared at the same time. But that was one of those moments of saying because I always say to the cadets, never say no. Always put yourself forward and do something outside your comfort zone, because you never know. And I had to, swallow my own medicine, and I put myself forward to be a parade commander. And I'm really glad I did. It was one of the highlights of my time.
It's funny to mention the AOC because we were with AOC 22 group a week or two ago, losing track of time as ever.
Yeah.
And he was talking about a number of the challenges, and he clearly was aware that we would be speaking. And one of those challenges that we touched on briefly was the flying activity that's taken place or not taken place over the last few years. And just, if it's not inappropriate, just your view on where you would see flying going forward for the Corps in the years that follow, perhaps.
It can only get better. It's been, if you look at my time as Commandant, those 8 years have been torrid as far as aviation for cadets has been concerned, and for factors way beyond the control of me or indeed, my senior leadership team. We had, my first year, we had the loss of the AEF because the propellers were falling off of Grob tutors at the time. Obviously needed to be fixed, but that took nearly a year of AEF. And then the following year, we had the glider pause, and that has lasted far, far longer than we ever expected. We obviously then had the footprint review where we lost VGS sites, we lost the Vigilant fleet, we had to rebuild the Viking fleet or get it recovered. And it's just been so long and so slow. And then to hit it all, we're just starting to recover, we're getting our VGSs back, cadets are flying, and along comes COVID-19 and everything stops again. And you know what, the resilience of the VGS volunteers and the cadets and staff who are, whose passion is aviation and aerospace is incredible because they don't give up. They're all willing and waiting, ready to go as soon as we get the chance to get those cadets flying again. So in terms to answer the question, the future of aviation, Group Captain Baz Dale is my Commandant 2 FTS, and he is working with an aerospace strategy group to shape the future for aviation, both gliding and fixed wing for the cadets, and looking at as many opportunities as he can to rebuild that glider fleet, to look at outsourcing where we can to non-military provision, obviously looking to the future under Project Telam for what will come for the fixed flights. And it's not going to be what it was back in the day. Go back 40 years and yes, there was an awful lot more gliding provision, but we're in a different world, we're in a different safety regime, and I think we will deliver flying and aviation. We have to, because it's our unique selling point, but we also do so much more, and thank goodness we do, because if we hadn't, we wouldn't have survived this last 6-7 years with such a hit on our USP, which is aviation.
And I guess that brings us on to my next exam question. Aviation, by definition, the RAF Air Cadet organisation, aviation presumably in the future will remain a key part of what the organisation is about.
Absolutely core to what we do, and we're very excited to be leading on aerospace, and we've just launched a space syllabus. That's not to say we're putting cadets into space yet, but we're starting to teach them about space because the Royal Air Force is the lead service for space, and we've just launched a space sort of STEM booklet with lots of opportunities for learning about our space syllabus. So we're at the front edge of what we want to do in terms of, and you don't do that in the other cadet forces, you don't do that in the Scouts or at school. So this is something different. This will hopefully also draw young people in who have a passion for aviation, aerospace and space. So I think, we will go forward. We will still have aerospace and aviation at the heart of what we do. Visits to the Royal Air Force, contributions to things like RAF Cosford Air Show and the Royal International Air Tattoo, as and when they come back to being live events, they're central to our ability to take cadets to air and show them both on the grounds, and in the air, chances to go in the Queen's birthday fly past, the odd occasional flight in a fast jet for some lucky cadets. These things, an aviation muster. We had several musters during my time, thanks to the staff at Odium and Benson. 1,500 cadets flying in a Chinook or a Puma in a day. Phenomenal logistics. Again, the volunteers working around the clock to make it happen. Lots of happy little cadets. 10-minute, 15-minute sortie, made for life. Absolutely buzzing. So very much part of what we do, and you can't let it go. We fought very, very hard to hold on to our gliding. The air experience flying is central and is planned for the future. And when we get something like 16,000 air experience flight sorties a year, it's not as much as we hope for, but it's still better than any other organisation in the UK.
I think that will probably reassure a number of people who would have witnessed the real challenges over the last almost half decade, really.
Yeah.
And it would be remiss of me as an ex-cadet, and forgive me because I'd actually forgotten. I joined the ATC 229 Farnham Squadron, which I know, Dawn, you'll recognise as being the best squadron in the Corps. Thanks for being able to confirm
possibly
that.
Comment on that.
Absolutely. And 615 VGS, where I did my gliding scholarship at Kenley, that's still there, that I saw just a few weeks ago. The continuation of that clearly is a very important thing. Now, from a STEM perspective, where does that play into what the Corps has done with regard to STEM?
Well, we're very lucky. We've got a great STEM ambassador in the shape of Group Captain Al Lewis, who's my regional commandant down in London and South East region, and he's an engineer by background. And I asked him a couple of years ago if he would be my STEM cohort, because I don't have an engineering or aviation background, and he looked like just the chap to do it. And he has done some really good work with a group of volunteers, led particularly by Wing Commander Nikki Weston, who's an RAF Air Cadet volunteer. And between them, they have basically mapped what we do in the STEM space, because we've been doing all of this since the 1940s, but then identified gaps, and they've set up a network of STEM ambassadors. They've linked in with the Royal Air Force STEM, with industry and defence, and they've just shaped the whole arena now around the STEM. So we're delivering regular STEM activity. We always were, but now we're doing more of it in a better structured way. And I'm always amazed when I see young cadets who've spent a day in school before COVID-19 hit, and they'd have done hours in the classroom, and then come to Air Cadets and spend half of the evening doing a STEM lesson. And I think, why would you want to? But they absolutely lap it up, because they're learning in a different way, and the dynamic between the volunteers and the children is much more different to school pupils and their teachers, whatever that is. I can't explain it very clearly, but there is a different dynamic. They want to be there and the volunteers want to be there, so they're learning together. So I think we've got a massive pool of STEM ambassadors, both at cadet level and adult volunteer level, feeding into the national, and the government agendas to try and raise skills in that area.
I do recall that the Air Cadet organisation as a whole, certainly during my time, was not a recruiting organisation. As a former head of RAF recruiting at Cranwell, I think the title then was Group Captain Recruiting or Director of Recruiting. I'm happy to be corrected. And then some years later going into the Commandant of the Air Cadet organisation, I think that there'll be people watching who will be really interested in your view on what does being a member of the RAF Air Cadets bring to somebody who might be thinking about joining the service. And a secondary question to that, if I may, is what advice would you give to a cadet who was thinking of joining the service?
Yeah, I think when I was IFR, Inspector of Recruiting at the time, it was quite difficult. There was a definite line that said, you don't step into the recruiting world. There is a recruiting organisation which I headed up. The cadets represented for me a target-rich environment, but the organisation was very clear. We're not a recruiting organisation. We're a uniformed youth organisation sponsored by the Royal Air Force. We teach military skills, citizenship, etc. And by the way, that does prepare them brilliantly for a life in the armed forces. However, it also prepares them for civilian careers too. And we've made it very clear that we want to support any cadets who would like to follow a career in the armed forces, but my staff and my volunteers are not qualified to give careers advice. They don't know the current process. So what we try to do is invite those recruiters in, either at squadron or wing or regional level, so they've got access to the professionals, and we signpost the cadets to different careers. But it's not just to the RAF either. We signpost them to any apprenticeships that are available within defence industry, because a lot of the cadets might not get into the Royal Air Force for medical reasons, or they might not get the qualifications they need. So we're all about providing a bridge from being a young teenager into full-time meaningful employment. If anybody does want to join the Royal Air Force, or indeed the Army or the Navy, and they become an Air Cadet, then they are building up an incredible CV ahead of the competition, in terms of then being able to talk about that or write about it in their applications. And nearly every cadet I've spoken to, who's gone on to then join the Air Force, talks about, my cadet experience is what they felt was the tipping point in getting in, whether it was getting into the particular branch or into the service, or indeed into universities to get the degree they wanted en route to joining the Air Force. So being a cadet you don't have to want to join the Royal Air Force at all, but if you want to develop some life skills that will benefit you in whatever walk of life you go into, you've got such a range of opportunities to tap into. And it is a big menu. I mean, some people think that, you join the Air Cadets and you have to do it all, and you've got to like flying, or you've got to want to do drill, but it's a menu. It's a volunteer organisation. The cadets do what they are interested in, but we try and progress them from age 12 right the way through to age 19. So they leave us, and they leave us as changed individuals, as young adults, ready to take on the world. They really are. Some of our best cadets are just absolutely awesome.
I think, and again, I'm sure that there'll be lots of cadets or former cadets watching, and from a very personal perspective, 1983 through until late 1988, when I started to join the service, the cadets have been an absolute handrail for me, and I've got no doubt that the highs and lows of my career, certainly the highs, were on the back of my time as a cadet. It's absolutely unforgettable. So 30 years in the service and 7 years as a cadet. The 6-7 years as a cadet were probably as memorable as 30 years in the service.
Yeah. And It is a life-changing experience. I think, got to remember, some cadets will join us and it's not for them. It isn't for everyone. They have to be able to conform to a set of standards. They have to, be self-disciplined, show respect for adults and each other. There's a lot of rules and expectations placed on these young people to become a member of our club. But the ones who it's not suited to are not going to enjoy it, will very quickly sift themselves out. And we end up with a core of incredibly motivated and well-disciplined, well-behaved, well-motivated young people who are a joy to work with, whether that's as permanent staff or as a volunteer. And when you talk to the volunteers and you ask them, what motivates them to give up so much of their time, they will always cite that underconfident, nervous, shy 12 or 13-year-old who left their squadron as a confident cadet warrant officer. They've seen that journey and they've contributed to that. And that's what motivates my volunteers a lot to come back and keep doing that. Many of them were cadets themselves, and they remember how it transformed them from those shy, timid little 12-year-olds into the confident adults they are.
If we go all the way back then, so we're now talking about where you are 37 years later in a career. Let's go back to before you joined the service initially.
Right.
What did you want to do as you were growing up?
I had no real clear idea at all. And I say that to a lot of the cadets because they feel as if they're under expectation to know by the time they're 14 or 15. Some of them do, and they're astonishingly focused. But I was completely unaware. I just knew what I didn't want to do. That was what was my guiding thing. I was in an all-girls school. I was quite academic. I was being coached and guided towards going to university because I was academic and people felt I could do a degree in various subjects. But my heart wasn't really in it. And at that stage, we're talking about the early 80s, there were very stereotypical female careers. And I just found myself not drawn to them. And I don't know why, but I would go to careers fairs and I was looking at the police and the armed forces. And I don't know why, but that's where I would find myself at a careers fair. I'd stand in front of the police and then I'd go and talk to the armed forces. And I'd normally end up talking to the Royal Air Force rather than the other two, because I found that more appealing to me as a female. And I don't know, there was some instinctive attraction about the uniform, the structure, the discipline, the chance to travel. And at that stage, I think if I tried to join the police, they had height criteria. I think for girls, you had to be 5'8", and you couldn't be short-sighted in most of the police forces. And I was only 5'6", and I was short-sighted. So I could only go to like 2 inner city sort of police forces, and that didn't really appeal. The RAF weren't concerned about how high I was and my eyesight, and I just found myself continually going back every careers fair and talking to the sergeant at the desk, which of course a few years later I was the person sitting at the desk, marketing that career when I was a little schools liaison officer. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I pretty much found myself, at the AFCO in Leicester, thinking, not really knowing what the Air Force was about, just sold on the concept of getting away from home, having responsibility, knowing that I could do some sport and travel, and just something completely different. And I liked the idea of the structure. And I've always enjoyed that. I like knowing where I stand.
How long did you anticipate staying for? Did you start on a short service commission?
4 years. I thought I'd do the equivalent of my degree course and then I'd go to university and be a teacher. That was my initial thoughts.
How did all that pan out then?
Well, every time I got to sort of the stage where they kept saying, sign on to a permanent commission, and I kept refusing because it felt like it was forever and I was signing my life away to age 38. Are you joking? So I kept signing on. So I did 4, 6, 8 as a short service commission. And then somebody said to me that if I wanted to get a PSF, Personnel Services Flight Tour, I'd have to be on a PC. They weren't going to give it to me if I was on a short service commission. And I was getting towards the end of sort of my time as a senior flying officer and thinking, I really want to be an OCPSF. I really want to do that job. And my bosses were saying, Dawn, for goodness sake, sign on for a PC. It's not that far away. So I signed on for my permanent commission quite late on. And then obviously I got my personnel services tour and then I was promoted, and you get signed on as a squadron leader and the rest is history, really. And it just kept getting extended.
You end up 37 years later being asked a question by an old mucker who's made you think, oh yeah, that was only for a short period.
It was for 4 years. I obviously can't count, but the reason I've stayed is I wouldn't have stayed if I didn't enjoy it. I've loved it. I've loved the variety. I haven't traveled the world. I haven't been in war zones. I haven't got medals for bravery, but I felt really part of the Royal Air Force throughout my whole career. I've loved it. I've had really great people jobs, brilliant teams. And I've stayed because I've loved it. You know, I have thoroughly enjoyed it. And when I came out to join the RAF Association, which at that stage I didn't even know that job was on offer, when I came out as a group captain, it was with a broken heart. I did not want to leave, but I just knew that at that stage, my children's education and their stability was really important. And I was going to head up into MOD and Air Command for 15 years of consecutive policy tours. And I just thought, I can't face that. So came out, and joy, I landed in the RAF Association, which was great.
Let's talk about that then. So the RAF Association, 5 years heading up that organisation. What did you find when you arrived there and getting it all going?
Nothing. Because if you remember, back in the day, we had Airwaves, which was the voice of the families, if you like, of the Royal Air Force. And for whatever reason, I won't go into the detail of it, they had lost their way, I think, with the Royal Air Force and vice versa. And they weren't on good speaking terms. And really, the relationship had foundered. And the RAF Association was invited, I think, by the Air Force to tender a contract to run a new Families Federation. And at the time, the Secretary General, Ed Jarron, literally called me at home and said, I understand that you might be looking for a job. And I'd just left the Air Force, didn't have a job. And I said, well, you know, what is it you want me to do? And he said, well, we've got to write a contract to set up a Families Federation. And I went, well, I've never written a contract in my life, but I've got a good idea what a Families Federation might want to do. And I literally sat in my kitchen with a big bit of paper and I did a mind map of things I thought I needed to do to set up a Families Fed. And I rolled it up and I drove over to Leicester and I met with Ed Jarron and talked him through it, magazine, website, resources, staff, offices, etc. And he shook me by the hand at the end of it and said, you're on a 6-month consultancy contract, make this happen. And I then had to apply for the job as the chairman, which seems a bit weighted because I'd written the TORs and I'd written the job spec, but I still had to apply for the job. And about 6-8 months later, I got the job as the first chairman. And that was, you know, that was an incredible opportunity because I literally started from scratch. No team, no offices. I worked from home for 6 months, I think, just setting everything up. And then I recruited my team in, which looked remarkably like an RAF flight. I had an ex-warrant officer, an ex-wing commander, an ex-flight lieutenant, a civil servant, and a wife of. And it was just an incredible dynamic team. And it was just like still being in the Air Force. I just didn't have rank anymore.
How did it feel letting go of the Families Federation and moving on to something else?
It was time for me to move on from the Families Fed. I did 5 years, and I'd never done that long in a job. I'd only ever done 18-month, 2-year tours in the Air Force. So 5 years felt like a long time. And I needed a new challenge. I desperately felt that I'd done what I could with the Families Fed. I'd set it up. We had really good working relationships with the Air Force, with the MOD, the ministers, etc. Had a great team. They were really well established. And I just felt a bit of an itch. And I thought, I need to get on and do something more. And I did look at other charities first. I actually applied to be Secretary of RAF at the time. Didn't get that a year or so before I actually left. Looked at the Ben Fund, looked at lots of different opportunities and was literally sort of wondering what to do next when RAF Air Cadets came up as an opportunity to go FTRS. And I just thought, that's got my name on it. I'm going to go for that and see what happens.
And
so yeah,
we're back to, and the rest is history.
Yeah, it's been a whirl. It's been fantastic.
We've spoken a bit about the jobs that you've done of late, and you've touched on a few of the junior officer tours,
yeah.
And I'd like to focus on the junior officer time actually, because we've done lots in latter. What were the best jobs that you had as a junior officer?
I think my best job was my first, probably, was being, I hated the job, cashier at RAF Lossiemouth. I stupidly put on my form at Hereford, which is where we were trained. You know, you don't put down where you don't want to go. And I'd put, not accounts, I don't want to do accounts. I hated that part of the training. So guess what? They gave me a cashier role. But Lossiemouth was an eye-opener for me. I'd never been to Scotland, never been on a major operating base. It had 3 or 4 flying squadrons. And I was given a very basic job, had no staff. The sergeant looked after me rather than me having to look after anybody else. I worked to a flight lieutenant. I was a little acting pilot officer. But I was OC WAF, which was in those days, you know, responsible for the morale and welfare and discipline of all the girls. And there were like 300 girls at Lossiemouth. So that was a big sort of flight commander role in my secondary duty role. And I just loved it. Got involved with charity stuff, fundraising, barrack block inspections, welfare stuff. A really, really fantastic first year. And only a year, but, you know, that really sort of embedded in me what it was going to be an officer in the Air Force, both as an administrator but also as a female. I mean, the OC WAF role obviously went in due course as we moved with the times, but yeah, that was a great tour. And then I did Ascension Island for 6 months, which was, you know, bizarre. Get a phone call from the desk officer, Dawn, would you like to go to Ascension? I don't even know where it is. I said, is it hot? And they said yes. I said, I'll go. And then I looked it up on a map and I thought, oh, it's halfway to the Falklands. Marvelous. So I did 6 months down there, which was, again, an incredible opportunity. Then I did some recruiting, ADC to AOC 1 group. What an opportunity. I did that as a little flying officer, whizzing around the country with the then AOC Air Marshal John Thompson, who sadly died in his 50s. That's a great guy to work with, learned a lot from him. So yeah, it's a really good junior officer tour. It's very good at shaping me and hopefully making me a better person, I guess.
You talk about learning, and that's probably a good time to ask from a leadership perspective. We touched on not commanding the RAF Air Cadets as such because it doesn't work. But what leadership lessons have you learned throughout the course of your career?
I think I learned very early on. When I was in initial officer training, I got recoursed after the 18 weeks. I was pushed back 12 weeks, and it was based on lack of leadership during Camp 2, which, if you remember, was the tactical leadership, and I was rubbish at that. And I went back and had to do my leadership sessions again, and then I got upcoursed because I actually could do it. I just couldn't do the tactical field craft stuff very well. But I remember sitting down with some senior NCOs who were going for their commission at the time, and I was very dejected. It was the only thing I'd ever failed in my life, and they were telling me I wasn't good enough. And my parents were trying to get me to leave at that stage and saying, you've lost weight. I'd had food poisoning. I'd lost a lot of weight. I must have looked absolutely dreadful. But I was so determined to stay. And these senior NCOs took me to one side and they just said, you're going to be a great leader, Dawn. Just have faith. And hearing that from, some senior NCOs who'd been in the Air Force a good 15, 20 years at that stage, sort of gave me the courage, I think, to go back and have another go. And I always felt, you listen to your senior NCOs in particular. And I did that religiously, right the way through all those junior tours. I always consulted and listened to my staff, and I had one of those red letter days. I still remember it, and the warrant officer at the time probably doesn't recall, but he has been in touch with me recently. When I was at RAF Waddington, I was OC admin wing, and we were having a discussion, myself and the chief clerk, warrant officer Steve Parker, and he'd been around for a long time, and I was still quite young, quite junior. And we were discussing a personnel case, and I'd been at Innsworth, which is where this case was going. So I thought I knew the ins and outs of what they were doing down there. And we sort of disagreed over what was going to happen. And I said, no, I think we should do it this way. And the warrant officer said, yes, okay, ma'am, I think we'll do that your way. And I just stopped. I was stunned. I think that was the moment that I felt a warrant officer had listened to me. And I was a bloody wing commander. It's taken all that time. But I remember that moment.
Approval.
It was just one of those, I'm thinking, I've made it. A warrant officer has listened and agreed with an alternative opinion. And I just thought, yeah, by listening for all those years and taking guidance from others, I think I'm now in a position where I can make those decisions and I can have the confidence to do it. So it took a long time. And I still now try and consult widely and listen to lots of people's views, because I am by far, not the cleverest person in the box at all. I've got a lot of very talented people around me. And I've always used the skills of my people, my team, and hopefully given them credit when it's due. I've never tried to take their credit. If they've done something for me, I will tell my bosses they did that. You get the reflected glory, don't you?
It's a really interesting observation, because we've been doing these Project Entertains for the members for, I think we're in week 13 or 14 now. And we've had the privilege to speak to many senior people within the service. And last week, we're with AVM Martin Clark, who is our area president for Wales, Midlands and South West, actually. So you'll probably get to see him at some stage. And he was mentioning very much the same thing about the bond that he'd had, certainly as a junior officer. He was talking about being on deployment with 55 Squadron, I think, and the bond with senior NCOs.
Yeah.
Does that dynamic exist in the RAF Air Cadet organisation as well, in structural terms?
Very much. We've got a lot of warrant officers, obviously, at squadron level, wing and regional level. And I have the equivalent to CASWO. I have the CACWO, which is not the nicest term, but the Commandant Air Cadets warrant officer, who is a senior warrant officer selected from the senior warrant officers to be their representative. And he has direct access to me, sits on our management board, etc. And yes, I have worked hard over my last 8 years to recognise and value the contribution of the warrant officer cadre without cutting across the chain of command, because they work to their regional commandants, etc., but trying to make sure that their voice is heard and that their experience is respected, and that they do have a voice. Because sometimes we know it happens, layers get cut out and you don't hear the truth. Things get filtered, and by the time it's got to the 1 star, everything is perfect. And actually there's a lot of trouble at grassroots and you're just not hearing it. And I rely on the warrant officers in particular and the senior NCOs to tell me what's going on. And through that role, they can have that quiet word with me, but also, you know, provide me with some morale and support, because it's quite a lonely digital post at the top of an organization. And sometimes it's good to just pick up the phone and have a chat with your warrant officer and just download. And that's a role that, you know, my personal warrant officer now has played for me in the last few years and helped me through some challenging times when you do have moments of doubt, you know, something's gone wrong or you haven't handled something particularly well, and the criticism is coming in all over social media, and you sit in your little bubble and think, oh, I don't know how to handle this. And it can break you. But if you can lean on someone like an experienced warrant officer as a friend, and maybe he's listening to this and I'll tell him to listen to it later, it means a lot, you know, because you can't do this on your own. You know, no one is big enough, strong enough, brave enough to manage an organization of this scale and size and the responsibility you've got. You can't do it on your own. So you lean on your own staff. We've got a great senior leadership team of group captains, you know, and volunteer wing commanders and permanent staff, but a massive team of volunteers out there as well who are incredibly supportive. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about your early days as a female in the service. You weren't absolutely where I'm about to go, but I'm just going to ask you what you saw in your time in service. We'll come on to the Corps later, because you mentioned about you not being able to join the ATC as was, and I was going to say before, when I got carried away with my own squadron, 229 and 615 BGS.
Another mention
the point I was trying to make before I got carried away with my own excitement was that females weren't able to join when I joined the Corps. No. And certainly in my squadron, at least, whether it happened elsewhere. And I remember that taking place. It was a big change. And this was only the early 1980s. So it's not, he says, but it doesn't seem that long ago. My question ultimately, though, is as a senior female officer now, looking back on your career, what did it mean to be a female officer, and what challenges might you have had?
I don't know, when I did my RAF 100 address in St Clement Danes Church in front of quite a number of senior officers and a lot of young cadets. And my whole theme was about that. It was about how the Royal Air Force had changed from a human factors perspective, from a gender diversity issue. And as you could see the young cadets' jaws dropping because they couldn't believe the Air Force I'd joined, in terms of how unfair it was and how discriminatory compared to, you know, when you look at it through the lens of 2020, it's a very different place. But also the senior officers looking at me and nodding and going, yeah, I remember that Air Force, I remember it. So, you know, go back to 1980s, I signed a piece of paper that said I was non-combatant. I was paid less than my male counterparts just by default because I had less X factor at the time. I signed a piece of paper that said if I fell pregnant, I would leave. There was no maternity provision. We were hounding homosexuals out of the service, sending the police after them and trying to out them, which was, you know, something I felt deeply uncomfortable with as a junior administrator, because I signed off paperwork to dismiss homosexuals, and it really grieved me because I couldn't get why we were doing it. Despite the security arguments and stuff, I could not understand why we were doing that. And I'm really proud that, you know, the Air Force has moved on, as have the whole armed forces and society. So it's a very different world. And you move forward and say, you know, the rules changed. I was allowed to stay and have children and still serve as an officer. There was no maternity wear for my first pregnancy. I was flouting around in civilian clothing because nobody had thought about designing female uniform for pregnant ladies. That just showed how far behind the times we were. I was able to stay and, you know, balance my work and my childcare and family obligations. We got equal pay. Eventually, the X factor was brought into line. In fact, we became part of the Royal Air Force. The W was removed, and we became one service. So it's a very different. But, you know, we're still a minority. You know, I think it was 92% male when I joined in 1980, and we're now something like 85% male. So we've not moved a great deal in all that time. So we're still a minority group, and I've got very accustomed to walking into rooms where I'm the only female in a senior male environment. It's getting better. There's a cadre of amazing females around us and above me. You know, we've got a 3-star, we've got several 2-stars, we've got a nice group of 1-star females. We're getting there, but it's taken an awful lot of time. So you do feel in a minority, but I have personally never felt discriminated against being a female ever.
I think that will echo the comments that we were very fortunate to have Wendy Rothery with us. I think maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. I've lost all concept of time. And of course, Wendy was one of your successors in what then became the group captain recruiting role after the IFR title was adjusted, and much the same. So, but an interesting period of time for you, having joined in the early 80s, to then as a senior female leader heading up the Air Cadet organisation. How do females see the Air Cadet organisation as a whole? Do you think they view it differently?
I mean, we have a much better female representation. We're about 30% female, but that's still not representative of society. You know, if we were truly representative, it would be 50-50. But then there's still, you know, some way to go in terms of representation of stereotypical activity. So, you know, is it right that girls find aviation, aerospace and STEM less attractive than men? Is it true that they do? Or is it they're just not aware of it? They're not being given that opportunity to see themselves in those organizations. So the more girls we have, and particularly in high profile roles such as senior volunteers and senior cadets out there in the community, promoting the fact that it doesn't matter whether you're a boy or a girl or anything in between, you can join us and you can achieve your potential. So I'd like to think that, you know, having a female commandant for a few years has inspired a lot of the girls to realize you can achieve it. But also it shouldn't demotivate the boys. You know, they should be motivated by good leadership, whether it's a man or a woman at the top, I think.
Let's fast forward to where we are now. Then you've got a couple of weeks left in the role. I think a couple of weeks. A
month, yeah, just 4 weeks to go. Yeah, something like that. 3.5 if I'm counting. I'm trying not to count.
I'm not going to make you tearful, I hope here. But what, given that there will be a number of people from the Corps, and I know there will be another method by which we'll say goodbye. But what message would you want to give to those volunteers, cadets in uniform or otherwise?
Yeah.
What message would you want for them?
It's just been such a privilege. And you know, you can say that, so she would say that. I genuinely mean it has been such a privilege to be commandant, and to have the chance to do that for 8 years has been unprecedented and incredibly welcome by me, because I've loved every minute. And I just want to thank them. They are an amazing group of people. And, you know, I've been lucky to be given, you know, guardianship of this organization for, you know, 8 years. I hand that on to Tony in September, or John Lawler will look after it in the interim, but, you know, Tony will take it forward. I wish them all the best. And I hope that I can look in the mirror and be as good a volunteer as many of the people I've worked with. You know, that's my aspiration now, is to be a good volunteer. If I can achieve that and help at local level, sector level, wing level, and maybe turn up at a national event every now and again. I'd love to do that, but I've got to earn my spurs. I can't just pitch up at nationals. I've got to get myself in at squadron level and work hard.
And I am sure that you'll be welcomed with open arms down in the West Country, which is, I'm guessing, I don't know, but I'm guessing that's where you're going to remain now. Roots.
Yes, it is. Yes, yeah. My family are all southwest based, and I decided to move from Lincolnshire down here last October, thinking I'd live here permanently from this summer. But because of lockdown, I've been here since March. So I'm in my new home, lovely part of the world, and looking forward to getting to know more of it.
And what does an ideal Sunday down in the southwest look like for you?
At the moment, it would probably be an early morning kayak down on the south coast, a little bit of kayak, maybe a picnic on a beach, and then part of the coast path in the evening, because the coast path down here is stunning as well. So I've got a map of the north and south coast paths, and I want to do them all. So we're slowly colouring in the bits of the coast path that we've done. And if I can find another dog in the next few months to take on the walks, that'll be even better.
Well, you see, the trouble is with saying something like that, you may well be deluged now with comments saying, I know exactly where there's a dog that you can have. Well, good. I'm sure that it won't be long before you have one.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned about being locked in down there since March, and of course, everybody in the same boat. And I've asked the same of everybody, Dawn, but has this period offered you any opportunities to do something that you didn't do before that you've now had the time to do?
I've had downtime. I haven't had downtime. I haven't had weekends off. I don't know how, 15 years. I've worked all of this tour and the Families Federation, and as I of R, I used to work a lot of weekends. So having 2 days of a weekend actually where I have phoned into virtual parades and stuff, but having downtime. So yeah, learning to kayak, I've gone out, I've done loads of walking. I've walked over 300K since lockdown started, because we're just out there every day, just exploring the local area, getting myself fitter. Haven't learned any new skills yet, but I think that will come with the cadets when they send me on some training courses. I shall learn some new skills as well.
It sounds like everything that I'm aware of anyway, but everything that you've mentioned this morning, you've had a really hectic 8-year run, and a bit of downtime in a lovely part of the world seems to be where you're going to be.
Absolutely, yeah, I'll make the most of it. But then I'll get bored and I'll just start looking for things to do. I'm sure you won't have seen the last of me. I'm sure.
Well, I have absolutely no doubt about that. There's no doubt that you will definitely not disappear off the radar. And you mentioned something before about your thanks for your team, And my thanks on behalf of the association for you as the Commandant for what the Corps as a whole does, and that's connection to branches, assisting with the Wings Appeal parades, all part of one big happy family, which is what the association clearly is all about. And I know it's what the RAF Air Cadets is about as well. So lovely to be alongside all of that. And
it is lovely for our cadets and staff. They take great pride in supporting the veterans in particular and their local branches. And, you know, a young cadet gets selected to carry the standard for a parade. It's special. So, you know, that relationship is mutual and much respected, and long may that continue.
I think that's probably a great place for us to draw stumps in. I mean, I'm going to mention a few things that will come on next week in a second, Dawn, but I don't know whether you've got a mug of something with you or a cup of something with you, but tradition certainly for me is to raise my glass to you and thank you ever so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure to see you again.
Thank you very much. I'll raise my thumb and say thank you to everybody who's listening, and all the best to everybody. Keep safe. And we will... So all the best to all of you, and thanks, Dale, for the opportunity. It's been lovely, really nice way to spend an hour.
Been really, really lovely to catch up. And Dawn, you may be interested in what will be coming, not next, because we're not quite BBC broadcasting, but next Tuesday we've got Flight Attendant Mick Frankel, who's one of our RAFLOs. Be great to tune into him. And then on Wednesday, Group Captain Finn Bradley, and that'll be at 11 o'clock on Wednesday. So all the detail, Dawn, and everyone who's watching is on rafa.org.uk, so please dial in there. But the final comments will be, Dawn McCafferty, thank you very much. Good luck over the next couple of weeks, and look forward to seeing you again at some stage.
Great. Thank you very much, Dale. Take care. Bye-bye.
All the best. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.